penthouse suite was drowning in silence. The kind of silence that comes right before someone gets hurt. Gaston Angelo stood with his arms crossed, watching 5 men in expensive suits fail at the one job he'd paid them a fortune to do. Open his safe. His jaw was tight, and the vein in his temple was doing that thing it did when his patience was about to snap. 3 hours, he said, his voice low and dangerous. I've given you 3 hours. The lead specialist, a Swiss man with sweat staining his collar, looked up from his laptop. Mr. Angelo, this is not a standard lock. The encryption is military grade, and the mechanical system underneath is. I don't care what it is. Gaston stepped closer. I care that my safe is locked, my money is inside, and I have a deal that needs proof of funds by midnight. Do you understand what happens if I miss that deadline? The Swiss man swallowed. He understood perfectly. Everyone in this room understood. You didn't work for Gaston Angelo without knowing exactly who he was and what he was capable of. Behind the safe, floor-to-ceiling windows framed the Manhattan skyline. The sun was setting, painting everything in shades of orange and gold. It would have been beautiful if everyone in the room wasn't terrified. Gaston's security team stood by the walls, watching. 2 men in dark suits with blank faces and ready hands. They'd seen their boss angry before. They knew how this usually ended. The safe itself was a monster. Nearly 7 feet tall, custom-built steel with ornate gold detailing. It looked like something from an old bank vault, all brass handles and a circular door mechanism that probably weighed 300 pounds. But underneath all that old-world charm was technology that cost more than most people made in a lifetime. Electronic locks, biometric scanners, and a mechanical tumbler system so complex that even the manufacturer couldn't crack it without the codes. Codes that Gaston had somehow lost in a recent reorganization of his business operations, which was a polite way of saying someone had betrayed him, and that person was already at the bottom of the Hudson River. Inside that safe was $500 million. Cash. Untraceable. The kind of money that didn't exist on paper, that didn't show up in any tax returns or bank statements. The kind of money that powerful, dangerous people needed to see before they signed deals that could shift the balance of power in the city. And Gaston couldn't get to it. We could try cutting through, suggested one of the other specialists, a younger man with nervous hands. With the right equipment. Cutting triggers the fail-safe, the Swiss man interrupted. Everything inside gets destroyed. Incinerated. Gaston's laugh was bitter. Perfect. Absolutely perfect. He turned away from them, running a hand through his dark hair. This was supposed to be simple. This was supposed to be the one place his money was completely safe. And now it was the one place he couldn't reach it. That's when he heard it. A small sound from the hallway. Footsteps. His head snapped toward the penthouse entrance just as a tiny figure appeared in the doorway. The girl was maybe 6 years old, wearing a faded blue dress that had been washed so many times the color was barely there anymore. Her dark hair was pulled back, and she clutched a worn teddy bear against her chest like it was the only thing in the world she could count on. She froze when she saw all the men staring at her. Lyra. Ruby appeared behind her daughter, the panic clear on her face. She wore her maid's uniform, the classic black dress with white trim that Gaston insisted all his household staff wear. Her hands were shaking as she grabbed Lyra's shoulders. I'm so sorry, Mr. Angelo, Ruby said quickly, her voice high with fear. She wasn't supposed to. I told her to stay downstairs. I'm so sorry. Gaston just stared at the child. His anger was still there, simmering right below the surface, but now there was something else too. A strange sort of curiosity. The girl, Lyra, wasn't looking at him. She was looking at the safe. Her eyes were wide, taking in every detail. The gold mechanisms. The circular door. The way the specialists had their equipment scattered around it like they were performing surgery. What's she doing here? Gaston asked, his voice softer than it had been in hours. Ruby's grip on her daughter tightened. She was hungry. I was going to bring her some food from the kitchen, but she must have. I'm sorry. We'll go. Right now. But Lyra didn't move. She tilted her head slightly, still staring at the safe with that intense, focused look that seemed way too serious for a 6-year-old. And that's when something shifted in Gaston's mind. Maybe it was the stress. Maybe it was the 3 hours of watching expensive experts fail at their job. Maybe it was just the absurdity of having a little girl with a teddy bear standing in his penthouse while his entire criminal empire was on the line. Whatever it was, he found himself walking over to her. He crouched down, his expensive suit jacket pulling tight across his shoulders. Up close, he could see how thin she was. How her dress didn't quite fit right. How she held that teddy bear like it was the only good thing she'd ever owned. "You like puzzles, little one?" he asked. Lyra looked at him for the first time. Her eyes were dark and serious. She nodded. Just once. Gaston felt his mouth twist into something that might have been a smile, if smiles could be cruel. "See that safe over there? $500 million inside. You open it, I'll give you $100 million. How about that? Mr. Angelo." Ruby's voice cracked. "Please, she's just a child." $100 million, Gaston continued, ignoring the mother's panic. He gestured toward the safe like he was offering candy. "All yours. Just turn those handles and make that door open. Think you can do that?" The room had gone completely silent. The specialists were staring. The security team had their hands closer to their weapons, not sure if this was some kind of test or if their boss had finally snapped. Ruby looked like she might cry. Or faint. Or both. But Lyra just looked at the safe. Then back at Gaston. Then at the safe again. And then she walked toward it. "Lyra, no." Ruby started forward, but one of the security men held up a hand, stopping her. Everyone watched as the tiny girl in the faded blue dress set her teddy bear down carefully on the marble floor. She walked right past the specialists with their laptops and their thermal cameras and their expensive equipment that had done exactly nothing for 3 hours. She stood in front of the massive safe, barely tall enough to reach the middle of the door. And then she pressed her ear against the cold steel. Gaston straightened up, his eyes narrowing. "What's she doing?" The Swiss specialist shook his head. "The mechanical system is internal. You can't hear anything from outside. The steel is too thick." But he stopped talking when Lyra's small hand reached out and touched the circular door mechanism. Not pulling it. Not turning it. Just touching it. Feeling it. Her eyes were closed now. Her whole body was still. And in that moment, in that ridiculous, impossible moment, Gaston Angelo felt something he hadn't felt in 20 years. Hope. The joke was about to become the most expensive promise he'd ever made. And he had absolutely no idea. Nobody moved. The penthouse had become a gallery, and Lyra was the only exhibit that mattered. 5 grown men holding their breath while a 6-year-old girl stood on her tiptoes, her small fingers tracing the ornate gold mechanisms on the safe door. Ruby's hand was pressed against her mouth, her other hand clutching the doorframe so hard her knuckles had gone white. She wanted to run forward, grab her daughter, and disappear back into the parts of this building where people like them belonged. The service corridors, the supply rooms, the invisible places. But Gaston had made his cruel joke, and now everyone was waiting to see how it would end. Lyra moved slowly, methodically, her ear against the steel, then her fingers on the main circular handle. Not the electronic keypad that the specialists had been focused on for hours. Not the biometric scanner. Just the old mechanical wheel, the kind you'd see in movies about bank robberies. "She's wasting time," muttered one of the security men. "Shut up," Gaston said quietly. His eyes never left the girl. Lyra's hand moved to one of the smaller brass handles. There were 3 of them arranged around the main wheel. Auxiliary locks, the Swiss specialist had called them. Each one had to be in exactly the right position before the main mechanism would even consider turning. She touched the first one, paused, moved to the second, and then she started turning. "Wait," the Swiss man stepped forward. "Those have to be calibrated in a specific sequence, and without the codes." The first brass handle clicked into place. The specialist stopped talking. Lyra moved to the second handle. Again that pause. That stillness. like she was listening to something nobody else could hear. Then she turned it, and it clicked too. "That's not possible," whispered the younger specialist. "The combination changes," the manufacturer said. "Clearly the manufacturer was wrong," Gaston said. His voice was steady, but something had changed in his expression. The cruel amusement was gone. Now he was just watching, actually seeing this little girl, maybe for the first time. The third handle clicked. Ruby made a small sound, something between a gasp and a sob. "Lyra, baby, you don't have to." But Lyra wasn't listening to anyone anymore. Her whole world had narrowed down to the safe, to the puzzle in front of her, to the patterns and sounds and mechanical logic that made sense to her in a way that nothing else ever had. She gripped the main circular wheel with both hands. For a moment, it looked absurd, this tiny child trying to move something that weighed more than she did. The wheel didn't budge. Gaston moved forward without thinking. "Let me." "No." Lyra's voice was small but clear. She didn't look at him. Wrong direction. She adjusted her grip and pulled the other way. The wheel turned. It moved smooth and easy, like it had been waiting for her all along. One full rotation. Then two. The mechanical tumblers inside the safe were falling into place, century-old engineering working exactly as it was designed to, responding to the touch of a child who somehow understood its language. The specialists were staring with their mouths open. Ruby had both hands pressed against her face now, tears streaming down her cheeks. The security team had moved closer, drawn by something they couldn't quite name. 3 rotations. 4. And then, with a sound like thunder compressed into a whisper, the massive steel door released. The failsafe disengaged. The electronic locks surrendered. The vault that had defeated 5 experts and 3 hours of cutting-edge technology opened for a 6-year-old girl with a teddy bear. Lyra stepped back as the door swung outward on hinges that probably cost more than Ruby made in a year. Inside the safe, stacked in neat rows, was more money than most people would see in 10 lifetimes. Bundles of hundreds, wrapped and organized with the kind of precision that only criminals achieved. $500 million in cash, sitting there like it had been waiting for exactly this moment. The silence in the room was absolute. Lyra turned around and looked at Gaston. "I opened it," she said simply. Gaston stared at her. Then at the open safe. Then back at her. And then he started laughing. It wasn't the cruel laugh from before. This was something else. Something wild and shocked and almost hysterical. He put his hands on his knees and laughed until his security team started looking nervous, wondering if their boss had finally cracked. "She did it," he said, still laughing. He couldn't even finish the sentence. The Swiss specialist was already at the safe, examining it with the kind of horror that comes from being made obsolete by a child. "This is impossible. The sequence she used, it shouldn't have worked. The codes were changed just last month." And yet, Gaston straightened up, his laughter fading into something sharper. "Here we are." He looked at Lyra again, really looked at her this time. At the intelligence in those serious eyes. At the calm way she stood there, waiting, like opening impossible safes was just something she did. $100 million, he said slowly. That was the deal. "Mr. Angelo, please." Ruby finally found her voice. She rushed forward, putting herself between Gaston and her daughter. "It was just a game. She's 6 years old. You don't have to. A deal is a deal." Gaston's voice had gone cold again, but it wasn't the cruelty from before. This was something different. Something almost like respect. "I made an offer. She accepted. She delivered. That money is hers. You can't be serious." The Swiss specialist looked like he might pass out. Do you understand what you're saying?" "I understand perfectly." Gaston pulled out his phone and made a call. "Marco, get me David Shapiro. Now." "Yes, my lawyer. I don't care if he's at dinner. Tell him it's about $100 million and he'll care." Ruby was shaking her head, backing toward the door with Lyra held tight against her. No, we don't want it. We can't. That kind of money, people like us, we can't. You think you have a choice?" Gaston's voice was gentle, but there was steel underneath. That money is already hers. I said it in front of witnesses. In my world, that means something. If I take it back now, I'm a man who breaks his word. Do you know what happens to men who break their word in my business? Ruby didn't answer. She didn't need to. The money makes her a target, Gaston continued. Every person I've ever done business with, every enemy I've ever made, they're going to hear about this. They're going to hear about the little girl who opened Gaston Angelo's impossible safe and walked away with a fortune. He moved closer, his expression serious now. Which means she needs protection. Real protection. The kind that comes from living here, in this penthouse, where my security can watch her every second of every day. You're saying we have to stay here? Ruby's voice was barely a whisper. I'm saying you don't have a choice anymore. Gaston gestured to one of his men. Marco, prepare the guest wing. 2 bedrooms. Full security detail. Nobody gets in or out without my approval. He looked back at Ruby, and his expression softened just slightly. I made a joke. Your daughter called my bluff. And now we all have to live with what that means. Lyra, still pressed against her mother's side, looked up at Gaston with those serious, intelligent eyes. Thank you, she said quietly. Gaston felt something twist in his chest. Something he hadn't felt in so long he barely recognized it. Don't thank me yet, little one, he said. We're just getting started. Outside the windows, the sun had finished setting. Manhattan was lighting up, millions of lights in thousands of buildings, and somewhere out there in that vast city, word was already starting to spread. The Mafia boss's safe had been cracked by a child, and Gaston Angelo had just made her $100 million richer. The game, whether any of them knew it yet, had only just begun. 3 days later, Lyra sat on the floor of her new bedroom, arranging her teddy bear's arms so he could see the puzzle she was working on. The puzzle was one of those fancy wooden ones from the toy store downstairs, the kind with 100 pieces that all looked exactly the same until suddenly they didn't. Her mother was in the bathroom, running water for Lyra's bath. Through the open door, Ruby kept glancing back, like she still couldn't believe this was real. Like she expected to wake up back in their tiny apartment in Queens, where the heat barely worked and the neighbors were always yelling. But this wasn't a dream. The guest wing of Gaston's penthouse was bigger than their entire old apartment. Lyra's bedroom had its own bathroom with a tub, so deep she could actually swim in it. There were bookshelves filled with books someone had ordered just for her. A closet full of clothes that actually fit. A window that looked out over the entire city, making everything below seem like a toy village. And outside her door, there were always men with guns making sure nobody came in who wasn't supposed to. Lyra heard footsteps in the hallway. Heavy ones. She knew those footsteps by now. Gaston appeared in her doorway, holding a paper bag from some restaurant with a name Lyra couldn't pronounce. Your mother said you liked dumplings, he said, his voice awkward in a way it never was when he talked to his men. Lyra looked up from her puzzle. We had dumplings once. For my birthday. Once. Gaston frowned. How old are you now? 6.5. He stepped into the room and set the bag on her desk. Well, now you can have them whenever you want. I bought enough for an army. Your mother's probably going to yell at me for spoiling your dinner. As if on cue, Ruby emerged from the bathroom, saw the bag, and sighed. Mr. Angelo. Gaston, he corrected, not for the first time. You live here now. You've seen me in my bathrobe. I think we're past Mr. Angelo. Ruby's cheeks went pink. She'd accidentally walked in on him that morning when she thought he'd already left for his business meetings. The kind where people either made deals or disappeared. Gaston, she said carefully, you don't have to keep bringing her things. The room, the security, it's already more than. I'm not doing it because I have to. He said it simply, like it was obvious. I'm doing it because I want to. Something passed between them then. A look that made Lyra feel like maybe she should focus very hard on her puzzle and pretend she wasn't there. Before either of them could say anything else, one of the security men appeared behind Gaston. Boss, your brother's here. The warmth drained from Gaston's face so fast it was like watching a door slam shut. Tell him I'm busy. He says it's urgent. About the Castellano deal. Gaston's jaw tightened. He glanced at Ruby, then at Lyra. Fine. The office. 5 minutes. He looked back at Ruby. Keep the door locked. Don't open it for anyone except Marco or me. Is everything okay? Ruby asked, but Gaston was already walking away, his shoulders tense in a way Lyra had started to recognize meant trouble. Dante Angelo was standing by the window in Gaston's office, looking out at the city like he owned it. He was younger than Gaston by 3 years, taller by an inch and meaner by a mile. Where Gaston wore his violence like a well-tailored suit, controlled, precise, only when necessary, Dante wore his like a weapon he was always looking for an excuse to use. Brother. Dante turned when Gaston entered, a smile on his face that didn't reach his eyes. I heard you've taken in some house guests. I don't remember inviting you up here. Gaston closed the door and leaned against his desk, arms crossed. You didn't. But when I heard you gave away $100 million to a child, I thought maybe you'd had a stroke. Wanted to check on you. The money's hers. She earned it. Dante laughed, the sound harsh and mocking. Earned it? She's 6 years old. She got lucky with a puzzle box. That puzzle box defeated 5 specialists and cost me 3 hours. She did it in 5 minutes. Gaston's voice was level, but there was warning in it. And I gave my word. In front of witnesses. Your word. Dante moved closer, his expression shifting into something uglier. You're going soft. Everyone's talking about it. Gaston Angelo, who once drowned a man for stealing 50,000, just gave away 100 million to some maid's kid. Careful. Or what? Dante spread his hands. You going to choose them over family? Over business? Over everything we've built? I'm choosing to honor my word. Something you might try sometime. The temperature in the room dropped about 20 degrees. Dante stared at his brother for a long moment. Then that smile came back, colder than before. You know what I think? I think that little girl is special. Really special. I think if she can crack your safe, she can probably crack anyone's safe. Don't. Gaston pushed off the desk, his whole body tense. Don't even think about it. Think about what? Dante's voice was all innocence. I'm just making an observation. That kind of talent, in the right hands, it could be worth a lot more than 100 million. She's a child. She's an asset. And you're wasting her on playing house with her mother. Dante headed for the door, then paused. You always were too sentimental, brother. It's going to get you killed one day. After he left, Gaston stood there for a long time, staring at nothing. Then he pulled out his phone and made a call. Marco, I need you to double security on the guest wing. Nobody gets close without my direct approval. I don't care if it's the Pope himself. You expecting trouble, boss? I'm expecting my brother to be himself. Which means yes. That night, Ruby found Gaston in the kitchen at 2 a.m. He was sitting at the counter in a t-shirt and pajama pants, the most normal she'd ever seen him look, drinking what was probably his 3rd or 4th glass of whiskey. Can't sleep? She asked softly. He looked up, surprised. I could ask you the same thing. Lyra had a nightmare. She's not used to the quiet. In our old place, there was always noise, sirens, neighbors, the subway. Here, it's too peaceful. It scares her. Gaston smiled slightly. Most people would kill for that kind of peace. We're not most people. Ruby sat down across from him. Are we in danger? Be honest with me. He was quiet for a moment, turning his glass in his hands. My brother is ambitious. And ambitious people do stupid things when they see an opportunity. He wants to use Lyra. He wants to own her. There's a difference. Gaston looked at Ruby, and his expression was the most honest she'd ever seen it. I won't let that happen. Whatever it takes. Why? Ruby leaned forward. Why do you care? You didn't know us 3 days ago. We're nobody to you. You're not nobody. He said it so simply, like it was the most obvious thing in the world. She's brilliant. She sees patterns nobody else can see. And you, he stopped, seeming to struggle with the words. You're a good mother. The best I've ever seen. You work 3 jobs to keep her fed and safe, and you never complain. and you never ask for anything. Ruby felt tears burning in her eyes. I don't know what to do with all this. The money, the safety, you being nice to us. It doesn't feel real. It's real. Gaston reached across the counter and took her hand. His palm was warm and calloused and surprisingly gentle. And I'm going to make sure it stays real, no matter what my brother tries. They sat there in the quiet kitchen, holding hands like teenagers, while the city glowed outside the windows, and somewhere in the penthouse, Lyra slept with her teddy bear, dreaming of puzzles that only she could solve. Neither of them noticed the security camera in the corner, recording everything, or the fact that someone who wasn't supposed to have access to those cameras was watching very, very carefully. The morning started ordinary, which should have been the first warning sign. Lyra sat at the kitchen table, swinging her legs while Ruby made her breakfast. Scrambled eggs with cheese, the way she liked them. Toast cut into triangles. Orange juice in a real glass, not the plastic cups from their old apartment. Gaston had left early for a meeting. Something about the Castellano deal going through, which apparently meant good things. He'd ruffled Lyra's hair on his way out, told Ruby he'd be back by lunch, and smiled in that way he'd been doing more often lately. The way that made him look younger, less dangerous. Marco stood by the door, scrolling through his phone. He was the head of security, the one Gaston trusted most. Ex-military, smart, loyal. He'd been with the family for 15 years. Mr. Marco? Lyra asked between bites of eggs. Yeah, kid. Do you think my teddy bear needs a name? I've had him since I was little, but he never had a name. Marco smiled. That's a tough one. What kind of personality does he have? He's brave. And he listens good. Sounds like a Bruno to me. Lyra considered this seriously. Bruno. I like it. Ruby set down her coffee cup and checked her watch. I need to run down to the laundry room. The sheets from yesterday. I'll send someone, Marco said immediately. It's 2 floors down. I can handle sheets. Boss's orders. You don't go anywhere without. The lights went out. Not flickering. Not dimming. Just out. The entire penthouse plunged into darkness, and with it, the quiet hum of electronics died. No refrigerator. No air conditioning. Nothing. Stay there, Marco ordered, his voice sharp. His hand went to his gun. Don't move. Ruby grabbed Lyra instinctively, pulling her close. Through the windows, the city was still lit up. Whatever this was, it was just the building. Just this floor. Marco spoke into his radio. Marco to base. We have a power failure in the penthouse. I need backup up here now. Repeat now. Static. Dead air. Marco to anyone. Respond. Nothing. He moved toward the hallway, gun drawn. Mrs. Ruby, take Lyra and go to the safe room. You remember where it is. Ruby nodded, her heart hammering. The safe room was behind a false wall in Gaston's office. Steel-reinforced, independent power, communication systems. Gaston had shown it to them on day 1. Just in case, he'd said. She lifted Lyra into her arms, even though her daughter was getting too big for that, and ran. The hallway was dark except for emergency lights that should have kicked in but hadn't. Ruby's footsteps echoed on the marble floor. Behind her, she heard Marco moving, covering them. She made it halfway to the office when she heard the sound. A door opening. Not the main entrance. The service entrance. The one only staff was supposed to use. Go! Marco shouted. Ruby ran faster. Her lungs burned. Lyra's arms were tight around her neck. Almost there. Just a few more feet to the office, to safety, to... A man stepped out of the shadows. Not one of Gaston's men. This one wore all black, his face covered with a mask. He moved fast, trained, and Marco's gun went off once, twice, the sound deafening in the enclosed space. Ruby screamed and dove into the office, slamming the door behind her. Her hands shook as she reached for the lock, but before she could turn it, the door exploded inward. 2 more men. They moved like professionals, and one of them had Ruby by the arm before she could even think about fighting. She kicked and clawed and bit, but he was twice her size and knew exactly what he was doing. Mom! Lyra's voice was high and terrified. Run, baby. Run to. A hand clamped over Ruby's mouth. She was dragged backward, still fighting, watching in horror as the second man approached her daughter. Lyra backed away, clutching Bruno the teddy bear, her eyes wide. She looked so small, so helpless. The man reached for her. And then Dante Angelo walked into the room. He looked different from his meeting 3 days ago. Harder. More focused. He crouched down in front of Lyra with a smile that made Ruby's blood run cold. "Hello, little genius," he said softly. "You and I are going to take a little trip." "No." Ruby thrashed against her captor, but he held firm. "Please. She's just a child. Please don't." "Relax," Dante said without looking at her. "I'm not going to hurt her. I just need her to open something for me. If she cooperates, she gets to go home safe and sound." He held out his hand to Lyra. "What do you say? Want to show me that magic trick you did with my brother's safe?" Lyra looked at the hand, then at her mother, then back at Dante. "You're the bad brother," she said quietly. Dante laughed. "Smart girl. Yes, I'm the bad brother. But right now, I'm the brother with all the power. So you can come with me easy, or you can come with me hard. Your choice." Lyra's chin trembled, but she didn't cry. Instead, she carefully set Bruno down on the desk. "For Mom," she whispered, "so she won't be alone." And then she took Dante's hand. Ruby's scream was muffled by the hand over her mouth as she watched her daughter being led away. She fought harder, desperate, but it was useless. The man holding her was too strong, and there were more of them in the hallway now, dragging Marco's unconscious body away from the service entrance. Dante paused at the door and looked back at Ruby. "Tell my brother he has 24 hours. If he tries to find us, if he calls the police, if he does anything except wait for my call, the girl disappears forever. Understand?" Ruby couldn't speak, couldn't breathe, couldn't do anything except watch her daughter's small hand in that monster's grip. "Good." Dante smiled. "Oh, and tell him I'll need her to open the old family vault. The one in the warehouse. He'll know which one." Then they were gone. The man holding Ruby released her, and she collapsed to the floor, gasping. By the time she scrambled to her feet and ran to the window, she was just in time to see a black SUV pulling away from the building, tinted windows hiding whatever was inside. Marco groaned from the hallway, starting to come to. Ruby ran to him, her hands shaking as she tried to help him sit up. "They took her," she sobbed. "They took Lyra. I couldn't, I tried to." "Boss," Marco mumbled, blood trickling from his temple. "Need to call the boss." Ruby found his phone where it had fallen. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely dial. Gaston answered on the first ring. "Marco, what?" "They took her." Ruby's voice broke. "Your brother took Lyra. He said 24 hours. He said if you try to find them, he'll..." She couldn't finish the sentence. The silence on the other end of the line was absolute. Then Gaston's voice came through, and it was the coldest thing Ruby had ever heard. Not angry, not panicked, just empty. The voice of a man who had just decided that someone was going to die. "I'm coming home," he said. "Don't touch anything. Don't clean anything. I need to see exactly what happened." "Gaston, what do we..." "Ruby." He paused. "I'm going to get her back. I don't care what it costs. I don't care who I have to go through. Do you understand?" Ruby clutched the phone, tears streaming down her face, and looked at Bruno the teddy bear sitting on the desk where Lyra had left him. "Yes," she whispered. "Good. I'll be there in 10 minutes. The line went dead. Ruby sank to the floor and pulled the teddy bear into her arms, holding it like she could somehow protect it the way she'd failed to protect her daughter. And in a black SUV heading toward Brooklyn, Lyra sat between 2 men in masks, her hands folded in her lap, her face expressionless. She was scared, terrified even. But she was also thinking, because Lyra was very good at puzzles. And right now, she needed to figure out how to survive long enough for Gaston to find her. Gaston walked through his penthouse like he was surveying a battlefield. The power was back on. Emergency services had been called and dismissed with cash and threats. Marco sat on the couch with an ice pack against his head, looking like he wanted to put a bullet in his own brain for failing. Ruby stood by the window, still clutching that teddy bear, her face pale and streaked with tears. Gaston said nothing. He just walked through every room, looking at every detail. The service entrance door, still hanging off its hinges. The scuff marks on the marble where Marco had been dragged. The office where his brother had stood and taken a 6-year-old child like she was a piece of property. His phone had been ringing nonstop. His people asking questions. Other families smelling blood in the water. News traveled fast in their world, and by now everyone knew that Gaston Angelo's penthouse had been breached, his security broken, and something valuable had been taken. He ignored all of it. Finally, he stopped in Lyra's bedroom. The puzzle she'd been working on was still on the floor, half finished. Her new books were arranged on the shelf by color, the way she liked them. Her bed was made with the precision of a child who'd grown up with almost nothing and treated everything like it was precious. Ruby appeared in the doorway. "Your men are asking what you want them to do. Tell them to wait." "Gaston." "I said wait." His voice cracked like a whip, and Ruby flinched. He saw it, saw the fear in her eyes, and something in him broke. He crossed the room in 3 strides and pulled her into his arms. Ruby went rigid with surprise, then collapsed against him, sobbing. "I couldn't stop them. I tried. I fought, but there were too many, and she was so scared, and This isn't your fault." Gaston's voice was rough. "This is on me. I knew Dante was dangerous. I should have had more security. I should have moved you both somewhere safer. I should have. She left this for me." Ruby held up the teddy bear, her voice breaking. "She said so I wouldn't be alone." Gaston stared at the worn toy. Bruno, she'd named it. This morning, a lifetime ago, when everything was still okay. His phone buzzed. Not a call this time. A text. From Dante. The old warehouse. "You know the one. Come alone at midnight, or I start mailing her back to you in pieces. And brother, bring the codes to the offshore accounts. All of them. That's the price for her life." Gaston read it twice. Then he forwarded it to Marco and put the phone away. "What did he say?" Ruby asked. "He wants money. Codes to family accounts." Gaston's jaw was tight. "He thinks this is a negotiation. Then give them to him. Give him whatever he wants." "I will." Gaston took her by the shoulders, making her look at him. "But I need you to understand something. My brother doesn't keep deals. He's not going to just take the money and let her go. The moment Lyra opens that vault for him, she becomes a witness. A liability." Ruby's face went even paler. "You're saying he's going to kill her." "I'm saying he's going to try." Gaston let her go and walked to the window. "Which is why I'm not going to give him the chance." "What are you going to do?" "Something I should have done years ago." He pulled out his phone again and made a call. Not to his usual people. This was a different number, one he rarely used. When someone answered, Gaston's voice was completely calm. "It's me. I need everything you have on the old warehouse district in Red Hook. Security systems, access points, neighboring buildings. I need blueprints, and I need them in the next hour." He paused. "And I need a team. Not family. Outside contractors. The kind who don't ask questions and don't miss." He listened for a moment. "I don't care what it costs. My brother has something that belongs to me, and I'm taking it back tonight. If you can't deliver, tell me now so I can find someone who can." Whatever the person on the other end said made Gaston smile. It wasn't a nice smile. "Good. Send everything to Marco's secure line. We move at 11. He hung up and turned back to Ruby. "I need you to stay here. More security is coming. People I trust, not family. They'll protect you until this is over. I should come with you." "No. She's my daughter. Which is exactly why you're staying here." Gaston's voice rose, then softened. "Ruby, if something goes wrong tonight, Lyra is going to need her mother. I can't risk you both." Ruby shook her head, tears streaming again. "This is insane. We should call the police. The FBI. Someone who can." "Do what?" "Dante has half the police in Brooklyn on his payroll. And even if they weren't corrupt, you think they'd move fast enough?" He said midnight. That gives me 6 hours to plan, prepare, and execute. The authorities would still be filling out paperwork while he's cutting her fingers off to make a point. The brutal honesty of it made Ruby gasp, but Gaston didn't apologize. She needed to understand what they were dealing with. This is my world, he continued quietly. This is what I am. And right now, that's what Lyra needs. Not a businessman. Not someone who plays by the rules. She needs someone willing to burn everything down to bring her home. Ruby stared at him for a long moment. Then she set the teddy bear down carefully on Lyra's bed and walked over to him. Bring her back, she whispered. I don't care what you have to do. Just bring her back. Gaston cupped her face in his hands. I promise you, Ruby. On my life, on everything I have, I'm bringing her home tonight. Then he kissed her. Not gentle, not careful, but desperate and fierce and full of everything he hadn't known how to say. Ruby kissed him back just as desperately, pouring her fear and hope and trust into it. When they broke apart, Gaston rested his forehead against hers. When this is over, he said quietly, we're leaving. All of us. Somewhere Dante can't touch us. Somewhere safe. You do that? Leave everything. I already lost everything once. When I watched you pull away from that window without her. His voice was raw. I'm not losing it again. Across town, in a warehouse that smelled like rust and old blood, Lyra sat in a metal chair with her hands zip-tied in front of her. The warehouse was huge and mostly empty. Dante had brought 6 men with him, all armed, all watching her like she might suddenly turn dangerous. In the center of the space sat another safe, bigger than Gaston's, older, with mechanisms that looked like they belonged in a museum. Dante crouched in front of her, that same false smile on his face. You hungry? Thirsty? I can get you something. Lyra didn't answer. She'd learned in the last few hours that staying quiet was safer than talking. Strong, silent type. Like your mom. Dante's smile faded. Here's how this is going to work. At midnight, my brother shows up with what I want. You open this safe for me. And then, he shrugged. We'll see. You're lying, Lyra said quietly. Dante's eyebrows went up. About what? You're not going to let me go. Even if I open it. For a moment, something almost like respect flickered across Dante's face. You're right. I'm not. Because you're too valuable, little genius. With your talent, I could own this whole city. Every safe, every vault, every secret locked away, all mine. Why would I let that go? Lyra's hands were shaking, but she kept her voice steady. Gaston will kill you. Gaston will try. Dante stood up. But I've got something he wants more than revenge. I've got you. And that makes me untouchable. He walked away, leaving Lyra alone with her guards and her fear and the massive safe that she knew, somehow deep in her bones, was going to be the most important puzzle she'd ever solved. Because if she opened it, Dante had no reason to keep her alive. But if she didn't, she'd never see her mother or Gaston again. She looked at the safe, studying its mechanisms in the dim light, her brilliant mind already working. And she started to form a plan. The warehouse district in Red Hook was a graveyard of industry. Rusted shipping containers, broken windows, and streets that the city had forgotten about decades ago. Perfect for the kind of business that needed to stay invisible. Gaston sat in the back of an unmarked van 3 blocks away, studying the blueprints on a tablet. Marco was beside him, cleaned up but still moving stiffly from the earlier attack. Around them sat 6 men who didn't exist on any official records. The kind of specialists you called when you needed a problem to disappear completely. 4 entrances, Marco said, pointing at the screen. Main loading dock here, side door here, roof access and emergency exit on the north side. Dante will have the loading dock and side door covered, Gaston said. Probably 2 men each, maybe more. The roof? Hopefully nothing. He's arrogant, but he's not stupid. He'll have someone watching it. Gaston looked at the team leader, a man called Torres who'd done 3 tours in places the government claimed he'd never been. Can you get 2 men up there quietly? Give me 15 minutes after we're in position. Torres had the kind of calm that came from seeing the worst humanity had to offer and living through it. Suppressors only. Nobody hears, nobody knows. What about inside? Marco asked. Gaston closed his eyes, picturing the warehouse layout. He'd been there 100 times growing up. Their father had used it for storage, meetings, the occasional interrogation. It was family property, which meant Dante had every right to be there. Which also meant Gaston knew every corner, every shadow, every weakness. He'll keep Lyra in the center, away from the walls. Clear lines of sight. The safe he wants her to open is probably already there. He would have moved it in days ago, before all this started. Gaston opened his eyes. He's been planning this for weeks. Maybe longer. So he knows you're coming, one of the other contractors said. This could be a trap. It is a trap. Gaston checked his gun, a Glock 19 that felt like an extension of his hand. He wants me to come in angry and stupid. Wants me to rush in and get myself killed so he can take over everything. And we're doing what exactly? Torres asked. We're going to give him what he expects. Me, walking through the front door at midnight like an idiot. Gaston looked at each of them. While you come through everywhere else at exactly the same time. Fast, hard, and professional. You see anyone with a gun who isn't me or a 6-year-old girl, you put them down. No warnings, no hesitation. Rules of engagement? Torres asked. There are no rules. This is family business, which means it doesn't exist. Nobody saw anything, nobody knows anything, and by tomorrow morning, that warehouse is empty and clean. Torres nodded slowly. And your brother? Gaston's expression went cold. He's mine. At 11:47 p.m., Lyra was still studying the safe. She'd been at it for hours, pretending to be more scared than she was, pretending she needed time to prepare herself. In reality, she'd figured out the basic mechanism within the first 30 minutes. It was older than Gaston's, and in some ways that made it simpler. Less electronics to confuse things. Just pure mechanical engineering from an era when safes were built like puzzles instead of computers. But she also knew that the moment she opened it, everything would change. Dante sat across the warehouse, playing cards with 2 of his men. He kept looking over at her, checking, making sure she was still there. Like she could somehow escape with her hands tied and 6 armed men watching. She'd counted them carefully. 6 inside with Dante. At least 2 more outside that she'd heard talking when they brought her in. Maybe others she hadn't seen. Her wrists hurt from the zip ties. Her stomach was empty. They'd given her water but no food. And she missed Bruno so badly it made her chest ache. But she couldn't think about that now. She had to think about the puzzle. Not the safe, she'd already solved that. The bigger puzzle. The one about staying alive. Hey! One of the guards had moved closer. He was younger than the others, maybe mid-20s, with a scar across his jaw. He held out a candy bar. You should eat something, he said quietly. Boss man doesn't care, but you're just a kid. That ain't right. Lyra looked at the candy bar, then at his face. You have kids? 2. Girl your age, boy who's 4. Then why are you helping him? The guard's expression tightened. Because he pays, and my kids need to eat too. World ain't fair like that. He set the candy bar on the ground next to her chair. But I ain't gonna let you starve while we wait. He walked away before she could respond. Lyra stared at the candy bar. Then at the safe. Then at Dante, who was laughing at something one of his men said. And she made a decision. At 11:58 p.m., Gaston stood in front of the warehouse loading dock, completely alone. He held his phone in one hand, a briefcase in the other. Inside the briefcase were papers, account numbers, access codes, passwords to enough money to run a small country. Everything Dante had asked for. Well, almost everything. The codes were real, but Gaston had already frozen the accounts 2 hours ago. By the time Dante tried to access them, they'd be empty. But Dante didn't need to know that yet. At exactly midnight, the loading dock door rolled up with a grinding screech of metal. Dante stood in the opening, backlit by harsh fluorescent lights, a gun in his hand. Behind him, Lyra sat in her chair, looking so small and scared that Gaston felt something break inside his chest. "Brother!" Dante called out, spreading his arms. "Right on time. You always were punctual." Gaston walked forward slowly, every muscle coiled and ready. "Let her go. You get what you want, I get her back." That was the deal. Was it? Dante tilted his head. "I don't remember saying anything about letting her go. I said she'd live. Big difference." "Dante, see, I've been thinking. Why settle for your accounts when I could have your entire operation? And with this little genius here, I could crack every safe in New York. Every secret, every stash, every hidden fortune, all mine." Gaston stopped walking. They were 20 feet apart now. Close enough to see every detail on his brother's face. Close enough to see the madness that had always been there, just hidden better before. "You can't win this," Gaston said quietly. "Even if you kill me, the family won't follow you. They know what you are. They'll follow the man with the power. They always do." Dante raised his gun, pointing it at Gaston's chest. "I'm sorry, brother. I really am. But you've gone soft, and soft men don't survive in our world." His fingers started to tighten on the trigger. And then the lights went out. Torres and his team hit every entrance at once, exactly as planned. The roof guards went down first, silenced shots in the dark. The side door guards never saw what hit them. And through the emergency exit, Marco came in fast and low, his weapon up and ready. In the sudden blackness, lit only by emergency lights that turned everything into shadows, chaos erupted. Gunfire. Shouting. Men screaming. Gaston dove to the side as Dante's shot went wide. He rolled, came up firing, and put 3 rounds into the loading dock opening where his brother had been standing. But Dante was already moving, using the confusion to fall back toward the center of the warehouse. Toward Lyra. Gaston ran after him, his heart hammering. Around him, Torres's team was efficient and brutal. Dante's men didn't stand a chance against trained professionals. Bodies were hitting the ground, and the whole operation was falling apart. But none of that mattered if Dante reached Lyra first. Gaston rounded a stack of crates and saw them. Dante had the girl in front of him like a shield, his gun pressed against her temple. Lyra's eyes were wide but dry. She wasn't crying, wasn't screaming, just breathing. Staying calm in a way no 6-year-old should have to. "Back off," Dante yelled. "Everyone back off, or I paint the walls with her brain." The warehouse went silent. Torres's team emerged from the shadows, weapons trained, but nobody fired. They couldn't, not with the girl in the way. Gaston stepped forward, his gun still raised. "It's over, Dante. Your men are down. You've got nowhere to go." "I've got her." Dante's voice cracked. "That means I've got everything." "No." Gaston took another step. "That means you've got nothing. Because the moment you hurt her, I will personally spend the rest of my life making sure you die screaming. And you know I keep my promises, brother." For a moment, Dante's resolve wavered. His gun hand shook slightly. And in that moment, Lyra moved. She'd been watching the safe all night, studying its mechanisms, and she'd noticed something. The main dial had a small lever underneath, hidden in the ornate metalwork. An emergency release, probably from back when safes were designed with fail-safes in case someone got locked inside. She'd been working at her zip ties for hours, using the edge of the chair to slowly wear them down. And 30 seconds ago, they'd finally given way. Now, as Dante's attention was locked on Gaston, Lyra slammed her palm against that emergency release lever. The safe door swung open with a metallic groan, and inside, empty. Completely empty except for a single piece of paper. Dante's head snapped toward the sound, his gun moving away from Lyra's temple for just a fraction of a second. It was enough. Gaston fired. The shot caught Dante in the shoulder, spinning him around. His gun clattered to the floor. Lyra dropped and rolled away, scrambling toward Gaston on her hands and knees. Dante collapsed against the safe, blood spreading across his expensive shirt, his face twisted in shock and pain. Gaston scooped Lyra into his arms, holding her tight against his chest. She wrapped her arms around his neck and finally started to cry. "I've got you," Gaston whispered into her hair. "You're safe. I've got you." Behind them, Marco and Torres secured the warehouse. The shooting was over. Dante's men were down, dead or dying. And Dante himself sat bleeding against the safe he'd wanted so badly, staring at the empty interior like he couldn't quite believe it. "There was never anything in there," Gaston said, still holding Lyra. "Father moved the contents 20 years ago. It's been empty ever since. You did all this for nothing." Dante laughed, a wet, painful sound. Of course it was empty. That's actually funny." "Marco," Gaston said quietly, "call an ambulance. My brother needs medical attention." "Boss, do it." Gaston looked down at Dante. "He's still family. And I'm not like him." Dante's eyes met his brother's, and something like understanding passed between them. "You really have gone soft." "No," Gaston said, holding Lyra closer. "I've just found something worth more than any of this." He turned and walked out of the warehouse, carrying the little girl who'd somehow become his whole world. Behind him, sirens were already starting to wail in the distance. The game was over, and for the first time in his life, Gaston Angelo had chosen something other than power. He'd chosen love. 6 months later, the beach house sat on a cliff overlooking the Pacific, 3 hours north of San Francisco. No neighbors for miles. No cameras except the security system Gaston had installed himself. No connection to the life they'd left behind in New York except for the offshore accounts that still existed in places governments couldn't easily reach. Lyra sat on the wooden deck, her legs dangling over the edge, watching the waves crash against the rocks below. Bruno the teddy bear sat beside her, a little more worn than before, but still her constant companion. She was working on a new puzzle, a wooden cube that twisted and turned in ways that seemed impossible until suddenly they weren't. "Breakfast," Ruby called from inside. "Coming." Lyra solved the last section of the cube with a satisfying click, then scooped up Bruno and headed inside. The house was nothing like the penthouse. It was smaller, warmer, full of windows that let in natural light and ocean air. The kitchen was bright yellow because Ruby had decided she was tired of living in places that looked like expensive prisons. There were pictures on the walls, real pictures of the three of them, not the kind of art that cost more than cars. Gaston stood at the stove, flipping pancakes. He wore jeans and a t-shirt that said "World's Okayest Dad," a Father's Day gift from Lyra that he'd worn so often Ruby had to buy him 2 more. His hair was longer now, less carefully styled. He looked normal. Happy, even. "Extra chocolate chips?" Lyra asked hopefully. "What am I, an amateur?" Gaston slid a pancake onto her plate, the chocolate chips arranged in a smiley face. Ruby poured orange juice and kissed Gaston on the cheek as she passed. These little moments of domesticity still felt surreal sometimes. 6 months ago, she'd been a maid terrified for her daughter's life. Now she was what? A girlfriend? A partner? A fiancé, technically. The ring on her finger was simple. Nothing like the massive diamonds Gaston could have afforded. But it was hers, chosen together at a small jeweler in town, and she loved it more than any fortune. They ate breakfast on the deck, the ocean providing a constant background soundtrack. Lyra told them about the new math book she'd been reading, college-level stuff that she worked through like other kids read comic books. Ruby talked about the garden she was planning, how tomatoes were apparently harder to grow than the internet made them seem. Gaston mostly listened, contributing the occasional comment, content to just be there with them. His phone buzzed. He glanced at it, frowned slightly, then set it face down on the table. "Everything okay?" Ruby asked quietly. Marco checked in. Dante's appeal was denied. He'll serve the full 15 years. The warehouse raid had made headlines for exactly 1 news cycle before being buried under more sensational stories. Dante had survived his gunshot wound and faced charges for kidnapping, assault, and a list of other crimes that Gaston had ensured were thoroughly documented. With Gaston's testimony, and the testimony of several other anonymous witnesses, who suddenly remembered all sorts of interesting details about Dante's activities, the case had been airtight. 15 years in federal prison. No parole possibility for at least 10. The family business had been restructured. Gaston had sold his interests to a consortium of the other families, taking a substantial loss but getting clean in the process. Some of his former associates had been angry. A few had made threats. But Gaston had leverage on all of them, years of secrets and insurance files, and he'd made it very clear that if anything happened to him or his family, everything would go public. The threats had stopped. Good, Ruby said simply. She didn't have room in her heart for forgiveness where Dante was concerned. Maybe someday, but not yet. Lyra was quiet, pushing chocolate chips around her plate. What's wrong, little one? Gaston asked. I was thinking about the safe. The empty one. What about it? Dante wanted what was inside so badly. He hurt people. He scared Mom. He took me away. Lyra looked up, her dark eyes serious. But there was nothing there. It was empty the whole time. That's right. So what was the point? Gaston set down his fork and thought about how to answer. Ruby watched him, curious to hear what he'd say. The point, Gaston said slowly, is that sometimes people spend their whole lives chasing the wrong things. They think power or money or whatever's in the safe will make them happy. But those things are empty. They don't mean anything. Then what does mean something? Gaston reached over and tapped her nose gently. This. Right here. Pancakes with your mom. Teaching you how to fish even though we're both terrible at it. Ruby trying to grow tomatoes that will probably die, but she's going to keep trying anyway. Hey, Ruby protested, laughing. It's the truth. Gaston grinned, then turned back to Lyra. The things that matter aren't in safes. They're in moments like this. They're the people you love and who love you back. That's the real treasure. Lyra considered this seriously. So my $100 million doesn't matter? I didn't say that. Gaston stood and started clearing plates. That money is your security, your future, your choice about what kind of life you want when you're older. That matters. But it's not what makes you valuable. You're valuable because you're you, brilliant, brave, and so damn smart you scare me sometimes. Language, Ruby said automatically. Sorry. So darn smart. Lyra smiled, that rare full smile that lit up her whole face. I know what I want to do with some of it. Yeah, Ruby asked. What's that? I want to start a foundation. For kids like me. Kids who are good at things but nobody notices because they're poor or their families don't have time or they don't fit in at regular schools. Lyra's voice grew more confident as she explained. We could help them. Give them teachers and books and puzzles and stuff. So they don't have to sneak into penthouses looking for food. Ruby felt tears burn her eyes. She reached over and squeezed her daughter's hand. Gaston stood frozen by the sink, a plate in his hand, staring at this 6-year-old child who'd somehow become wiser than most adults. That, he said finally, his voice rough, is the best idea I've ever heard. Later that afternoon, while Lyra was down at the beach with her metal detector, another new hobby, Ruby and Gaston sat on the deck with coffee. She's really okay? Ruby asked quietly. After everything? She has nightmares sometimes, Gaston admitted. Last week I found her checking all the locks on the windows at 2 a.m. But she's getting better. The therapist said kids are resilient. And what about you? Are you okay? Gaston was quiet for a long moment, watching Lyra waving her metal detector over the sand, probably finding bottle caps and thinking they were treasure. I used to think I knew who I was, he said finally. Gaston Angelo. 3rd-generation family. Powerful. Feared. Untouchable. He laughed softly. Then a 6-year-old girl opened a safe, and my entire identity just cracked open. Everything I thought mattered didn't. Everything I thought I'd never have, this normal, quiet life, became the only thing I wanted. He turned to Ruby. You asked if I'm okay. I'm more than okay. I'm happy. Really, genuinely happy. For the first time in my life. Ruby leaned her head on his shoulder. Good. Because I'm not letting you go back to the other life. I don't care how boring you think growing tomatoes is. The tomatoes are extremely boring. Shut up. They sat in comfortable silence, watching Lyra discover something that made her shout with excitement. Probably another bottle cap. The foundation, Gaston said. She's serious about it? She's been researching nonprofits on her tablet for weeks. I think she's already drafted bylaws, whatever those are. Of course she has. Gaston shook his head, smiling. Okay, we'll do it. I know lawyers who can set it up properly. We'll find the right people to run it, get it funded. Not just her 100 million, I'll contribute too. You don't have to. I want to. It's perfect. It's exactly what that money should be used for. He paused. And maybe in some small way it makes up for all the damage I did before. All the people I hurt building the fortune that made this possible. Ruby lifted her head to look at him. You're a good man, Gaston Angelo. I hope you know that now. I'm trying to be. He kissed her forehead. For you. For her. For us. Down on the beach, Lyra had abandoned her metal detector and was now building an elaborate sandcastle. It had towers and walls and a complex system of moats that showed the same mechanical understanding she'd used to crack those safes. But this time, she was building instead of opening, creating instead of taking. And watching her, Ruby and Gaston saw their future. Not perfect. They'd all carry scars from what happened in New York. But real. Honest. Built on love instead of fear, on choice instead of obligation. The sun was setting over the Pacific, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. Inside the house, dinner would need to be started soon. Tomorrow, Lyra had a video call with the architect they'd hired to design the foundation's first learning center. Next week, Ruby had a job interview at the local library. Not because they needed the money, but because she wanted something of her own, a purpose beyond just being a mother and partner. They were building a life. All three of them. Together. And in the end, that was worth more than all the safes in all the penthouses in the world. Lyra came running up from the beach, covered in sand, her face flushed with excitement. I found a sand dollar. A whole one. Look. She held out her prize like it was a diamond. And Gaston took it carefully, examined it seriously, and told her it was the most perfect sand dollar he'd ever seen. Because it was. Not because of what it was worth, but because of who had found it. And that made all the difference. The end. The story that began with a cruel joke and an impossible safe had ended with something impossible in a different way. Redemption, love, and a family that nobody would have predicted but everyone had needed. Lyra's foundation would go on to help thousands of overlooked children discover their talents. Ruby's tomatoes would eventually grow, in the second year, after much trial and error. And Gaston would spend the rest of his life proving that people could change, that the worst parts of your past didn't have to define your future. They'd found something better than money in that safe. They'd found each other. Right now in your community, there's another Lyra. A brilliant child whose intelligence is invisible to the systems designed to find it. A young mind that could solve problems you haven't even imagined, if someone just gave them the chance. Lyra's story teaches us three powerful lessons. First, worth isn't measured by circumstances. Lyra was a hungry child in a faded dress, but her brilliance was always there, waiting to be seen. Second, real power is choosing love over everything else. Gaston had an empire, but he found true strength when he risked it all to protect one little girl. Third, the best investments are in people, not in safes. Not in cash or power, but in the overlooked genius that could change everything. Every day, we lose potential that could transform our world because we're not looking in the right places. Look differently. When you meet a young person from difficult circumstances, ask yourself, what have they learned that textbooks don't teach? Demand better. Push your schools and programs to recognize different types of brilliance. Because somewhere tonight, there's a child with the mind to unlock solutions we desperately need. They're waiting for someone to see them. Someone like you. If this story moved you, hit that subscribe button. Join us in recognizing brilliance in unexpected places and sharing stories that matter. Subscribe now. Share Lyra's story. And help us find the next genius hiding in plain sight. The world needs their brilliance. And they need you to believe in them first.